we are ready to start glazing. So you have watched a really informative slideshow and taken some notes on some details and specifics about glazing, but now I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. With our pinch pots, our goal is to pour glaze in the inside, and then we're going to use a different surface treatment on the outside that I'll show you in just a few minutes in this video. But for our glazing demo, what I'm going to do is choose a glaze. So I've got some buckets of glaze here. These are all dipping and pouring glazes, and I can tell that because they're in these 5-gallon buckets. If they were meant to be painted or brushed on, they would be in much smaller jars. As you learn, these can still be painted on, but they're much more difficult to get to flow nicely. So for the most part, we dip or pour these glazes, and that makes glazing really quick and easy. And if done well, you can get a really nice clean coat on your glaze. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the test tiles and choose which glaze color I want. On the bottom of each test tile, you can see that the name of the glaze is written, and so I can find this glaze in the buckets. All of the glazes have all of the buckets have the glazes names written on them. So I've chosen the turquoise color. So as you know, glazes have to be mixed in order to be used properly. All of these have been mixed fairly recently, but we always need to mix them up again every time we try to use them. So I'm going to mix this with a stir stick. You can also use the drill mixer, but it can be quite messy, and sometimes it's just not worth the bother of cleaning it if you only are going to do one glaze. So, or if the glaze has been mixed up pretty recently. So I'm mixing this with a stir stick. My rule is that I want this to be kind of a thick milk or thin cream consistency. It's dripping off of the stick pretty smoothly. The other thing I can do is stick my finger in and see if I can still see some details on my finger. After the glaze drips off, then I know it's a good consistency. So I've stirred with the stick. I have a bucket of water right here, and that's going to be my rinsing water. I don't have a sink in this area, so I'll need to use this bucket to clean things up or to rinse my hands off even after I stuck my finger in there. And I have towels nearby to dry my hands off too. So now I'm ready to pour glaze into this pinch pot, and I'm going to show you how to do that quickly so you don't get too thick of a layer of glaze. This glaze has been mixed up really well. All of the particles are suspended in the water, and it's ready to be poured inside my pinch pot. I need a vessel in order to scoop out the glaze and pour it into my pinch pot. So I need to pick a measuring cup or some kind of a container that will hold enough glaze to fill this pinch pot. You don't want to have to pour it halfway and then get more glaze and pour it again, because we want to do this relatively quickly so our layer of glaze inside here is not too thick. So I picked this measuring cup, and what I'm doing is kind of remixing again by scooping and then pouring out at a very low level so I'm not splashing this glaze everywhere, just so I can kind of get the feel of also how quickly this glaze will pour and how smoothly I can get it to pour. So once I feel comfortable with that, I'm going to hold everything over the bucket in case I drip. Carefully pour the glaze in till it reaches the rim, and then I'm just going to hook this right here. I don't want to worry anymore about it, and I'm going to pour this straight out. Hold your pinch pot upside down until it's done dripping. This will dry really quickly, but I don't want to flip it back when it is still dripping, because then those drips can come down the sides. So now I've got a nice even layer of glaze on the inside of my pinch pot. And because I haven't glazed the outside yet, I can just use a sponge to clean up any drips around the edges that I don't want. Now that this is dry and poured out, I can set this aside, dump out the rest of the glaze that was in here, and then put this measuring cup into my rinsing bucket so that I can wash it out and put it away. So now the glaze on the inside of my pinch pot is dry. It only takes probably less than a minute to get that glaze dry. And now I'm ready to clean up some of these drips. You might have glaze drip on the outside of your pinch pot, depending on if you poured it smoothly. It really doesn't matter because we haven't glazed the outside yet. So all we need is a container of water and a sponge, and we can easily clean off the glaze drips that we have here. One thing we want to be really careful of is not to get the inside super wet. I don't want to drip clean water in there because it might wash away some of my glaze, but I dripped in there a little bit. You can see it's not a huge deal. I just don't want to touch that glaze when it's wet like that. And I want to be careful not to do too much of that. But all I need to do is take this sponge and just wipe around that edge. And I'm turning so that it's a clean spot of the sponge every time. And then when it gets dirty enough, I rinse it back out. So having a clean side of your sponge every time you wipe is helpful. So see, that's dirty. Now I'm turning the sponge so that I'm not wiping the dirty part of the sponge onto the pot. Now we're ready to do the surface treatment on the outside of your pinch pot. You all put texture on your pinch pots, and the reason that we did that is because we are going to do a treatment called staining, and then we'll wipe away the stain, and the darkest parts will stay in the recesses of your texture. So every table should have a container of stain and water. So stain is a really fine powder that can come in lots of different colors. We're using a black one here. And water. It's mixed to just a very watery consistency. We don't need very much of the stain, but the stain is heavy, so it settles to the bottom. So you need to continually kind of mix it as you're using it. So I'm just gonna take this paintbrush with the stain on it and paint it right onto the outside of my pinch pot. And what you'll notice is that the stain particles will settle into the deep recesses of your texture and bring out the texture that you put on your pot. You're going to do this all over the pot, being careful not to get it on the inside where your glaze is, because this stain will then miscolor the glaze a bit if it gets in there, and you won't be able to wipe it out because then you'll affect the glaze that you already have in there. So I've got stain painted all over my texture. And then one more thing I want to show you is that because stain is not glaze, we can put it on the bottom of our pieces. It won't stick to the kiln shelf because it doesn't have any glass or melter in it. It really is just colorant and water. So I'm going to take this stain and paint it right on the bottom, and it will gather in the name that I put on the bottom and make that show up a little bit more darkly too. So the last thing I want to do to make this really pop is I'm going to come in with a clean sponge again and wipe away the high points. This is kind of like when you wiped away the glaze strips. You are just using a clean sponge and very lightly just going over the top part of your texture. And what that will do is take the stain off of the tall points and leave it down in the recesses, and it will make the places that have stain stand out even more. What's important though is that you're continually kind of using a clean spot on the sponge. So turning the sponge and then rinsing it out when it gets dirty. The last step in finishing our pinch pots is to put a clear glaze on the outside. We don't want to put a colored glaze or any other kind of like opaque glaze on the outside because that will cover up our texture and the stain work that we've done on the texture. So I am going to mix up this clear glaze. This one's called Clear Bright. We have another one in the studio called OG Clear that you will probably use because I have more of that available. But as you can see, it has separated and it needs to be mixed up. So I'm going to do that for you so you can see what that looks like. All right, so the glaze is mixed up really well. It took me a little while, but it's nice and homogenized now, and it is the consistency of like thick milk. I can tell when I dip my finger in there, I can sort of see the details of my finger through the glaze, but it's not dripping off like water. So I'm going to take my pinch pot, and because this pinch pot doesn't have an easy thing to grip, I'm going to dip this pinch pot in two parts. So the first dip that I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the pinch pot upside down, and I'm going to dip it about halfway into the glaze. Now here's the cool part. The clear glaze will not go onto the inside of my pinch pot, because when I turn it upside down and I dip it in, there's going to be air inside of this pinch pot, and that air will keep the glaze from going up inside there, as long as I keep it upside down and level. If I tip it, the air will come out and the glaze will go in. So I have to keep it straight upside down. So I'm only going to go in halfway, and then I'm going to take it out and shake it off so that the glaze drips will come off and the glaze will dry. And then I'm going to hold from the other side and dip it in this way. My last step will be to clean off the bottom so that there's no glaze on the bottom. So holding it upside down firmly so I don't drop it, I'm just going to dip straight in and come straight out and shake off the glaze just a little bit. And it should start to dry really quickly, but I don't want to flip it over until all the drips are dry. The drips have dried, and I've turned this pinch pot over so I can kind of hold it more comfortably. But I can still see that the glaze that's around here is still pretty wet. So I don't want to touch it up here yet until it's really, really dry. So I might just put this down and let it dry for 10 minutes or so, or I can go get a hair dryer and get the drying process to speed up a little bit so that I can hold it from the top and dip it one more time. All right, so I went and used the hair dryer, and the glaze that I dipped in already has dried, so I'll be able to hold this from the top and dip it in the glaze and not leave fingerprints. But check it out. The glaze on the inside did not get covered by clear glaze because the air that was inside the pinch pot kept the glaze out of it. It's pretty cool. All right, so now because I can touch the top here, I'm going to hold the pot where the glaze is already covering, and I'm just going to dip in the bottom to try to meet the line of glaze that I already have. So then I'm going to overlap just a little bit and then shake it off and let it dry. Once it's dry and I can handle it easily, I'm going to clean off the bottom so that I don't have glaze on the bottom of my pot. Okay, so I'm back with my sponge and my clean container of water, and I'm ready to just use that sponge to wipe off the bottom so that no glaze is anywhere near where the kiln shelf will touch. So I want to make sure any spot that's going to be touching the kiln shelf is free of glaze, so I don't attach my pot to the kiln shelf and make a big mess in the kiln. So I'm going up a little bit higher than I think I need to, rinsing the sponge and making sure all that glaze is off. Now that my pinch pot has been glazed and I've cleaned the bottom of it, I'm ready to fill out the rest of my kiln ticket. So you filled out one side of your kiln ticket when you made your pinch pot and had it bisque fired. Now you're ready to fill out the second half of the kiln ticket. So for the second half of the kiln ticket, you're going to check mark, is the bottom completely clean? Well, I know I did mine, so I'm going to say yes. Dipped or brushed glaze. Which one for this one? I dipped this glaze. And then list the glazes used. So I will write inside aqua and outside I put clear bright. That will tell you and tell me what glazes you used in case they look different than what you expect, and that will be kind of like a way to give us information. Also, please make sure that you don't write yes on whether or not you completely clean the bottom of your pot if you actually didn't. Make sure you get that done.